We have an election coming up here in just a few months. Some of us are still wondering if the previous election was legitimate. There's a lot going on in the country. Are we heading towards socialism? Are we living in a rigged system? To help me think through this, I have my special guest, Jovan Hutton Pulitzer. Jovan, thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
So I want to just give my audience some background. Um, in my opinion, you're a brilliant guy. You've created all of these inventions. You have an inventor's mind. You are a deep thinker. You were heavily involved in trying to help the American people understand the 2020 election. I watched that. I used to watch your Facebook chats at nighttime. And then I saw that you were involved in the Arizona audit, which the Democrats said, how dare they
Right.
question anything, even though they questioned Donald Trump for 4 years. And now we have another election coming up. Wanted to, just get your thoughts on a couple of current stories. Just minutes before getting on with you, President Biden revealed that he plans to give 100,000 illegal immigrants Obamacare as like a test pilot program. And he's going to have the American taxpayer cover all of the costs. Is this illegal invasion sustainable? And when are these 10 million illegals going to start voting in our elections?
Well, the first part of it, let's address the 10 million illegals. As far as I know, half of them haven't left. The number's probably more like 20, 21 million illegals. And look, this is political payola. When they hand them a cell phone, when they hand them a prepaid credit card, when New York says, hey, if you can make it to New York, we'll pay you $10,000 for an illegal, they're literally creating a new voter base. They're buying their voter base. And so in many countries where you don't get health care, you get people here and you give them health care, they think they've been given the world. And so I do believe this is election interference. I do believe at best case, it's unethical to be doing this with illegals breaking into our country and not even taking care of our military, et cetera. At worst case, I think there's probably many ways to overturn this by law because it is breaking numerous laws that should not allow this. But I think it shows that they're trying to water down our country, get more people that are socialist tendencies, that's how they've been raised, get them into America, and then basically kind of put them on the America teat and provide them all they can. And they're just not going to wean them off. They're going to wean us onto socialism.
Wow. Okay. Let me unpack that. Okay. So they get people that like a fish in water, right? They don't know what water is because it's all they're accustomed to, right? They don't know what capitalism is if they've only lived in socialism. So
Correct.
now they come in here and they don't put them to work. They say, hey, we're going to give you a cell phone. We're going to give you a luxury hotel, 3 to 5 meals a day, $1,400 monthly check, plus a $10,000 cash bonus. Then we're going to put you to work. And all of this was brought to you by the letter D for Democrats. Is this, am I following correctly?
That's correct, but they're even going further. When they're crossing the border and they are given these benefits, they are literally told this is compliments of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Literally, they're saying Joe Biden has done this for you. And this is why Joe Biden is a great president. And this is why you should vote for Joe Biden. Several weeks ago on my program, Cut the Crap, that I do on Rumble, I showed some of these documents that they were handing illegals. And it is compliment of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And also, they have already been testing in many states, allowing illegals to vote. Let's look at Arizona and the contest in Maricopa County, Arizona. Supposedly, President Trump lost by, we'll just call it 10,500 votes. But they have a unique clause in Arizona that if you're an illegal, they say, well, you can't vote for a mayor or city council or school board member or whatever, or sheriff, but you can vote for president and senator. They do it via federal ballot. And when we have a president that supposedly lost the election by 10,500, President Trump, you have to try to rectify, well, 24,000 people voted and their votes counted, and they could not even prove they were American citizens.
Wow. Whatever came of that audit? I know that they spent a lot of time auditing. In some areas, there was more ballots than voters. They found that they had not checked hundreds of thousands of signatures, and yet the Supreme Court took one look at Kari Lake and just booted the case out. It's like nobody wants to make the tough call that there is something not right in the 2020 election.
Well, it's a little more subtle than that and a little more blatant than that at the same time when you understand how they mix these things together. Many things were found in the audit of Maricopa County. First off, Maricopa is the fourth largest county in the United States of America. It's the second largest voting block of voters in the United States of America. And it itself is a larger voting population than 30 some odd states. So it's monumental. When we got the audit, there was basically three of us in the audit, cyber ninjas, then of course myself doing the forensics, and Cypher, which has been Cotton. Those are the three that put together the group that we're going to do each of our expertise in the audit. It was about 2 million plus ballots in an election that they said was 2,089,517 votes. Now, if we were just to discuss some of the things that were found, why did the ballot printer for Maricopa County supposedly mail out 2.5 million and change ballots? But when we checked the records, they actually printed 4,089,000 for one county. Now, why would they need 57% more ballots than the county could even use? Next, why for the first time in history did they stop counting? We all went to bed, they stopped counting. Next, why for the first time in history did they say, we need all these days to count it? What you have to understand happened in Maricopa is every single checkbox of findings that showed something was wrong with the election was discovered. However, we made a horrible mistake. And when I say we, I mean the American people, and we fell for something that we never knew was a problem. Let me give you an example. When Bill Barr came out, and everybody was expecting Attorney General Bill Barr to correct this stuff. But when he came out and said, we've looked at it, and we just don't believe there is enough fraud to make a material difference to the outcome of the election. Now, those are the words that allow them not to prosecute. So two things happened in 2024. First, you have to understand how the law is written. So let's say between you and I, our candidate lost by 100,000 votes. But you and I, independently, on our own, we find 90,000 dead and illegal voters. In our minds, we want to do the right thing. We shouldn't even have one, much less 90,000. But we go to the Secretary of State or we go to the Attorney General, we say, look at this. Well, the way the law is written is we have to find, meaning you and I, without their help, without their assistance, we must find enough illegal votes to change the outcome of the election. So I told you it was 100,000, you and I found 90. Let's say we found 100,000. We better find 105 because they're going to try to weed them back to get under that threshold because nobody wants to prosecute this. Now there's a second hook in there. Not quite 40 years ago, the Republicans did a consent decree. This was a lawsuit back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. The Democrats accused the Republicans of cheating in elections. Well, as it was coming to head, the Republicans said, okay, we'll just sign a consent decree. What do you want us to do? And 40 years ago, it ran out just as President Trump ran, ironically, for 2020. In that consent decree was a covenant to never sue about election fraud. Don't bring it up. Don't sue in it. Don't bring a case. So see, for almost 2 generations, Republicans, every attorney that's been brought up in that process, and most lawmakers have been brought up in that process, it was absolutely forbidden to discuss election fraud. And so what happened, it kind of got lost from the consciousness. And during that time, the machine, the deep state, the liberals, extremists were able to say, there's no election fraud, see? So they kind of conned it. Now, from there, you have to understand how all of this works together in lockstep, because what they did is they pulled out every potential way to throw an election. It's not one way to throw an election. There's many ways. So like, number one, there were probably 435,000 voters, quote unquote, in Maricopa. And when I say a voter, that means somehow they got a ballot from them. But either the people no longer live there, or they moved out of the county, should not have even voted in that county, or they were dead, or they actually aren't a real person. It's the investigation process that gets tied up. And here's what happened. Everybody came out in 2020, and the mantra that everybody heard, PCAPs, it's the machines changed the vote. We saw it on TV. We saw the numbers get taken away. Well, unfortunately, that took on a life of its own. The numbers that we saw on TV never have been, throughout history, the certified canvass vote. They're actually just estimates. So even if they change, it doesn't matter because it's not legal, it's not certified. But so many people got on that bandwagon saying, we saw them take away votes from Donald Trump. And then they said the machines changed the vote. Now, what happened is when you combine people seeing the numbers change on TV, which, by the way, is the very first time it ever happened in history. I think that was part of the setup. And then all of a sudden it comes out and we get this myth that we heard Dominion executives going to throw the election and we've got them on tape. All of a sudden it became about the machines. And that's why all of that stuff took a life of its own. I believe the system got everybody to scream about the machines so they could avoid what is really the evidence, and that's the paper. And I'll give you an example. Why would they do all mail-in ballots if they didn't need the paper? Why would the ballot printer print 1.5 million more ballots than they needed if they didn't need the paper? Why would they need extra 10 days, 12 days to count if they weren't massaging the paper? And I think that's where people got off track, is it's people, paper, and programs that throw elections, not the machines. And I'll tell you why. It's the same reason your gun doesn't shoot anybody. It sits in your nightstand, it sits in your gun safe, wherever it is. It takes a bad person with bad programming to make that gun turn into a weapon that's deadly. It's the same as the voting machine. Voting machines need either people, paper, or programs to corrupt them, but the machine itself does nothing. And then one word came into play, and this is what sealed the fate of all of it. Remember, I said for 40 years, the GOP's never sued on elections. So you've got all these brand new attorneys coming in. You got the GOP apparatus that I think in many ways doesn't want the truth out because they both, left and right, play this game. And everybody threw out one word: fraud, 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 fraud. That was fraud. When it comes to elections, the only people that can, the ways you can declare fraud is the Secretary of State must declare it, the Attorney General must declare it, or it has to go through a court of law. Those are the only three ways you can make the declaration of fraud. Now, in the 7 swing states where it all happened, did the same thing. We don't have friendly AGs, and we certainly don't have friendly Secretary of States or governors in that matter, right? And so by throwing the word fraud out there in these lawsuits, it immediately, because people forget we have state elections, it took it out of state purview. It immediately threw it up to the federal purview, which is, Merrick Garland, who's not going to do anything to save America, and it allowed them to say, well, you don't have standing, and kick it back down, where it looks like it's being lost when they're really saying, no, go back to the lower court. We wasted time, we wasted expertise, we were on a wrong learning curve. And I believe all of that stuff about the machines changed the vote, and all of this stuff about fraud was a setup to get, well, us to fumble in court. And when I say us, I mean us as a people, to fumble in court and run out time. And that's what you're watching. You're watching how the courts, they used the time against it. And here's the nail in the coffin. When I first agreed to do the Arizona audit, I had to inform the top Arizona lawmaker, there's this code called US 42 1973 and 1974 and 1984 and US Code 5220-701. Not that you need to know that, but they have to keep the ballots for 24 months, specifically if there's any questions. They didn't even know this. And so we're fighting for the ballots. So you're now on a 22-month countdown clock where they get to destroy the physical evidence. Let's accelerate 1 day short of 22 months, destroy day. On that day, in the evening, 5 in the evening, the GOP announced we filed 72 lawsuits to get a hold of the ballots to see what happened in 2020. By the time the lawsuits were served, everything was destroyed. Kind of magical. They made their announcement 1 day before. This is the game we're locked in politics. Why? Because it's politics.
Wow. You probably saw this, just speaking of running down the clock, just a couple of days ago, the 3rd District Court in Pennsylvania came out and said, well, we know it's been 3 years and it's too late, but all of the ballots with no date and a bad date should have all been removed. And even though most of them were for Biden, it's too late now. I mean,
well, you know why it's too late?
Why?
Here's why. Here's what we have in the United States of America. First, let me give you a hack Arizona used, and it'll explain why that matters in Pennsylvania. Arizona, Maricopa County, refused to tell us how many return ballots did you get that were back undeliverable. Those are called the 5 duns. No such person, no such number, no such address, unknown or deceased. Those are the 5 duns, meaning that ballot packet comes back to the county. All states have to report that, right? Every state has to report that. Maricopa dragged their feet for 17 months and kept on refusing to report the number and give us the number. When they reported the number, well after the audit, they said they got 56,000 ballots returned back undeliverable. However, when we checked through the Postal Service to find what the number was, it was 110,000 ballots. Now, when the state sends you a ballot in an envelope, they're basically saying, if this comes back, you're gonna get a vote, because they're not checking signatures, right? They just want them to come back. Well, they're supposed to account for every one of those envelopes and every one of those ballots. That's called a ballot packet. Now, if you're nefarious and you can get a hold of them, you open the packet, you pull out the ballot, and you pull out the security envelope. The most important thing is the secondary envelope inside. They vote it the way they want. They put it in a secure envelope and they return it in the system. By the way, 2,000 mules, those ballots coming in, that's what they were doing. Those are called cracked ballots. Those are the return ballots or Skyped, stolen ballots, cracked open, used, and they circulate them back in. They're supposed to keep those if they were returned. Nobody kept them. Nobody kept a record. The county said, well, the ballot company did it. We gave it to them. Ballot company said we destroyed them. That ended up being more than likely 110,000 illegal votes, which occurred on legal ballots. Now we'll jump to Pennsylvania, understand what this is. Okay. In America, we have this thing called secret balloting. In the late 1800s, in a county, someone exacted revenge for the way somebody voted because Tom voted for the wrong farmer, right? And it happened because they could tell on the ballot who the person was. Well, back at that time, there were 3 people voting in that county. So it was pretty easy to see who did it, right? But they enacted a law that you can never know how a person's vote. So in America, we have what's called secret ballot rule. Now, how this works is when it's mailed to you and that packet comes to you, it's identified to you, that mail-in ballot. It's got your name, your address, and everything on it. When you take it out, there is also part of it that has your identifying information on it. But when you do your affidavit and seal it, it hides it. The moment the ballot comes in between that security envelope and your voted ballot, that's the return ballot packet, the moment they open it up and take the ballot out, the envelope goes one way, the ballot goes another way. There is no way from that point on to ever claim that ballot back in the system because you do not know who it is. And more importantly, you now don't have the return date or the date it came in. And what's happened is they've realized how to take advantage of these systems. And so they're technically right. They draw it out from the time you scream. If you don't do anything about it between the time it's discovered and the next election comes around, which by the way is a midterm, 2022, right? If you don't do it by then, you have this little phenomenon called latches, which means you knew about it, but you didn't do anything. Therefore, we don't have to do anything either. That's how they use the running out the clock to get to where they is. It says, yeah, they were, and they don't have dates and they shouldn't have been accounted, but we can't do anything about it because legitly they cannot do anything about it. If they kept the envelopes, they could. If we were still within that time of them looking at it and us giving us the information, auditing it, we could tell you every ballot and every person. We'd just find the bad people and we could eliminate at least those with no regard to how they voted. But they run out the clock on purpose, and that's part of the game that they've learned over time.
Wow.
When was the first mail-in ballot fraud in the United States of America?
I don't know.
The second term of Abraham Lincoln was the very first time in the United States of America that mail-in ballots were used and counterfeited. It happened the second term of Abraham Lincoln. Now, when was the first time in the United States we found accidentally a box of uncounted ballots, which we find all the time now? It was 1948. It was LBJ, and LBJ was running for the Senate in Texas. He was getting his butt whipped. But by the time the day wound down, his campaign manager hopped in a car, drove to West Texas, right? And magically found a box of ballots. It's called Box 13. You can look it up. And lo and behold, there were 202 ballots in there, just enough for LBJ to win. What's the moral of the story? They learned how to do that one in 1948, and it still goes on today.
Well, and then on top of that, Republicans have kind of built this reputation of we're going to vote on voting day, like we're not going to go through the mail. That could be corrupt, but then the machines break down. The ballots don't go through the machine properly. They teach you to fill it in with a marker instead of a pen or something. So like, how do we overcome these challenges? Just challenging them in court one by one?
You have to challenge them in court one by one. But number two, you have to understand what your rights are. When we all used to be forbidden to use Sharpies because they bled through them ballots, and it was a no-no. They learned during the second term of Obama how to utilize the Sharpie hook, that, hey, it does bleed through. Maybe we can use this to our benefit, which in fact they did. When I exposed SharpieGate in Arizona for the Arizona audit, that, hey, look, these Sharpies are causing problems with the machines, all the news came out and said, this guy's whacked in the head. It's not true. Well, let me tell you how whacked I was in the head. It was 130,000 ballots that were affected. When you use a Sharpie on the wrong type of paper, which they did on purpose, 130,000 ballots had over 2 million extra votes on them. And so it's like this spotted piece of paper comes through. It's all these dots everywhere, and the machine goes, what do I do? Now, that's what's called a time hack. When that ballot goes into the machine and it can't read it, it doesn't tell you, hey, Stephen, I can't read it. It doesn't do that. It just holds it up here in a software program, and it needs a human to intervene. And so what they did, and I'll just use those 130,000, for example, in those 130,000 alone, on election day, because that's all of them magically occurred election day, because they only filled the voting offices with Sharpies. First time in history. Wouldn't even let you use a ballpoint pen. You have to use a Sharpie. By the way, they can't tell you to do that. That's against law. So what they did on election day is they used paper. Like I said, it's people, paper, and programs that will make it go. They used paper to hack the system. It made the ballots technically questionable because there were so many dots. It suspends them, it holds them up here. Now, they're not going to come back down as votes until a human intervenes. Now they've got time to do it. Now let's go over here. Early vote. Maricopa has election month, not election day. So they've got 28 days of mail-in. When you're looking at the mail-in numbers come in and the early vote numbers, even though they tell you, well, we don't count the votes, it's still the same scanning process. When it's scanned in, which they can do early, it 100% tells them who got the votes. The definition of count means they pulled out the card from the machine and went to this machine and plugged it in, and now it technically drops in the count file, but they know in advance. So the way the rig goes is you've got to have an overabundance of paper. You've got to create synthetic time hacks, and you got to buy yourself more time. And so what did they do? Flood it with all these extra ballots they use as they want. Go to election day, get them suspended, hold up here. That doesn't mean you're canceling the votes. You're just holding them. And now you get to deal cards underneath to make it look like this foot race. And then finally you start bringing these down approved, and it looks like a foot race. And they just barely won. Not only did they, quote unquote, just barely beat Donald Trump, what's interesting is it was exactly enough to beat Donald Trump, but to not trigger an automatic full 100% total recount of every ballot cast. Isn't that amazing? They didn't go that far. It's all by design.
Wow, 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 wow. And that suspended process, remind me, that's called adjudication? where
Adjudication.
somebody makes a judgment call on who to.
Well, here's
who to
how it
give
works.
the-
In previous years, when all of us voted, anytime, if you voted anytime over the last 20 years, adjudication just basically means, in your case, one of your kiddos you got a hold of your ballot, spilt some cereal or something on it. You still used it because it was a mail-in or early vote, and the machine can't read it because there's a smudge on it. Or you used a really sloppy gel pen, right? And you're a hand slider. You did it, but you tend to slide your hand down it and it just smudges the ink. Well, those will cause the machine to go, hey, I need eyeballs to look at this, right? Or somebody at president, in the president slot, they vote for nobody and they write in, I hate them all. And they just wrote it on there. Well, the machine sees that. It has to have a human look at it and say, okay, what is this telling me? That's called adjudication. In history, the standard used to be about one of those types of ballots needing a human intervention every 200 ballots. By the time we got to 2016, it had gotten to about 2 to 3 per batch of 200. If they ever went more than 3, if they went 4 out of 200, that's 1 out of 50 ballots. If 1 out of 50 ballots, the machine says, I can't read it, something's wrong. What they used to do in the past is they would immediately triage, retire the machine, because they would assume the machine was broken, right? And they would hot swap a machine in line and put a brand new one in line, and it would fix the problem. In 2020, first time in history, again, ever happened, takes all these first, adjudication in Maricopa County, and ironically, in almost every one of the swing states, was not 1 out of 200, was not 1 out of 100, was not 1 out of 50, it was 1 out of every 8 ballots. Now, they did a little nifty trick that even your kids would catch this. When a ballot is bad and it goes into the machine in the past, the paper, as they were running them, the machine would say, hey, this isn't working. And so it would basically spit out the ballot, like the drive-in car wash with your dollar bill, you got try to straighten it out so it'll read it. Think of it kicking it back. It would do that. Before 2020, they would take that ballot, and if that ballot got kicked out, they would take the ballot and they would set it over here at the end of the table. And through all the voting stations, little runners would come and grab the ballots and they would stack them. It's called outstacking. And you'd see that pile of paper grow. That paper then would be transferred to an adjudication team, which is supposed to be 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, and 1 supervisor. Okay, both major parties and 1 supervisor. They would look at it. They would decide, okay, what's wrong with this ballot? How do they really vote? And they get to make the decision. However, once again, coincidentally, in all the swing states, led by Maricopa in 2020, for the first time in history, they used electronic adjudication. Now, what that meant was when the ballot went in, the machine would know something was wrong with the ballot, but it wouldn't spit it back out so it could be outstacked in the room with the people doing the votes. It allowed, for time-saving purposes, it allowed a picture of the ballot to be shipped to a remote building to ping somebody, hey, something's wrong with this ballot. So the first thing they did is they took away the physical evidence. Then when it got to those people, the computer through artificial intelligence would go, hey, this is where we think the problem is. It wouldn't let them look at anything else. It would just identify one and the person would have to correct it or make a decision. Now let's go back. In 2016, outstacked ballots in Maricopa would have been about 20 boxes of ballots. In 2020, now remember the physical evidence, I told you, they just did smoke and mirrors. They did it electronic. They don't outstack it. 2.5 pallets, and a pallet is 45 boxes. 2.5 pallets of outstacked ballots. You know, and I know if we were working there and we were one of these dedicated people working in elections and we started seeing that pile of paper stack up like that, we would have been screaming our heads off, guys, something's wrong. Something's going wrong out there. Look at these papers piling up. They hid it all. And that's how they did that process of suspending. They suspended about 250,000 ballots in a synthetic hold that allowed them to do what they needed to do. I know it's horrible, isn't it? You sit here but yes, people don't deal with what we have to deal with. This is so easily fixable. It's infuriating how this is just so easily fixable. But it happened to us because we're conservatives. And I don't mean that as a slight. I mean it is because we're raising our families. We're trying to prosper. We're trying to better our lives. We're not out picketing and politicking. We're not doing it, right? We're not putting on our bandanas and scarves and throwing rocks through windows and trying to get reparations and Nikes, right? We're just doing the American dream. And because that process of complaining and moaning and picketing is so unappealing to somebody who has a life, right? We just ignored it. And we trusted that our politicians do what we put them there to do. Wrong. We should have never trusted them. We should have been as politically active as the left, and we'd have paid attention. But I say, look, I'm a major perp of this. I'd vote for a president. I treated my freaking ballot like a lottery ticket. I'd vote for a president, maybe a senator. The rest I didn't care about. Now I get to Maricopa having to use my technology, my patents and brains to figure it out. And I found out that Stephen Richter, the board of supervisors in Maricopa County, has far more power than the president of the United States. We did it to ourselves. Now we have to fight very hard to get out of it.
You know, I interviewed a gentleman, and the topic of grades and proficiency came up in Baltimore. I said to him, is it true that 90% of students can't do basic math in Baltimore? He said, yes, it's true. And I said, they've been under Democrat rule for 50 plus years. Why don't they fix that? And he laughed and then said, they don't want to fix it. They just want to keep power.
Right.
And it was the first time that my brain, like, of course, if somebody was struggling, I would want to fix that. And he said, they don't want to fix it. They just want to keep power.
There's a problem. There's a problem. We'll fix it. You got to get on it. You know what's even more insidious than that? Why'd they stop teaching kids to read and write cursive?
I don't know.
You know the real reason? Because when you forget to read and write cursive, you can no longer read our founding documents.
Because they're all.
It's as simple as that. When it looks like a foreign language to you because you're used to it in screen and it's block freaking letters, and you have no concept of cursive or how to write cursive or even to look at it and understand cursive, you can make your way through it. You cannot read our founding documents.
Okay, here's a question that just popped into my brain. They used to be able to hide this really well, and I'll bet you years ago most of the American people would have said this is crazy, right? But yes. Now I think the majority of the common man and common woman knows that our CIA interferes in elections, rigs elections, and does coups on other countries. Why wouldn't we look internally and go, why wouldn't they do it here at home?
Very true. It's all about money. It's all about greed, and it's all about power. And it's sad. It's very sad. I have to tell you, look, I sat and watched. I was starting one of my medical companies. We did a $50 million deal the night and it actually signed the paperwork the night Donald Trump got elected in 2016. Turning around, watching 2020, I'm doing a lot of my medical research, which is in nano analytics using cameras to be able to find advanced disease states. And I watched what happened in 2020, and I knew something was inherently wrong with all of this, because it's supposed to be mail-in and the paper wasn't folded, just all of these things. The system has always been designed to do this and to make us look away. And the system perpetrated this on us. This did not happen by accident. You've got to look for the second right answer. I'll give you an example. We are literally, and I hate it when I say this, but it's a true fact. We are literally having to battle elementary schools and kindergartens, having books teaching our young children to have anal sex, or that they can cut off a boy's penis and make him a girl, or a young girl's teeth and make her a boy. Those are in elementary school books. And then go up to our military. In our military, we have guys in dresses running our military. If you just step back at that chaos, that message is more being sent to the world. So if you remember, Saddam and all these other people would say America's the great Satan. What's really being signaled to the world is America's lost its way. They know what they're doing. These other nations find that stuff disgusting, right? And can be a very religious people. They are embarrassing us on the international scene, making our own allies want to turn away with us. Because see, there's only two types anymore. There are the allies that they've already peeled off, like the UK, and they've already corrupted, right? And the allies that still stand with us, they're doing an operation to make our allies too just turn away and don't look because America's gone too far. This is a massive, massive, massive psychological operation all at one time. And they're dumping it all on us. Every problem we have, whether it be young people can't afford a home, or inflation is the worst it's been in 60 years, or we're paying 50% more on average for everything now than were. All of it's fixable. Even this disgusting stuff we have in school books, or you'll let a rioter off, but if somebody goes out and prays in front of an abortion clinic, they're going to jail. All of it's fixable with the ballot, 100%. We get our ballot straight. We get our voting straight. None of this stuff will happen. So what happened is they set this up and they needed the ballot to do it, but they've created all of these fires around us where you can't help but be distracted. Because if your heart is over here with kids, you're going to run and you're going to do it. But the one thing you're not looking at is the state of the ballot. What are they ignoring? What are the truths they ignoring? The truckload of ballots coming in, right? That's the whole con. They unleashed it all to fracture us. Even look at the anti-Semitic crap that's going on now, where we all forget Judeo-Christian, and now they've got everybody at every level fighting. They're fighting on our school boards. They're fighting on pee-wee baseball teams, right? They're fighting with cheerleaders to say a prayer. They can't do it. What they've done is they've thrown bombs into every part of our life to make us become firefighters, putting out a bunch of little fires while we don't focus on what's happening right now. And what they're doing is they're siphoning as much money as they can out of the system, while every 100 days they're increasing our debt by $1 trillion. Period. It's a hobbling effect.
Yeah, it is. It is going to hobble us. Okay, I have a bunch more questions, but I'm gonna set.
I'll go as long
aside.
as you want. You just do what you want to do. I'm game.
I'm in the process of reading your book. It is absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
What are people going to read, or what are they going to learn? I know what they're going to read, but what are they going to learn by reading this book?
The book's called Countdown to Chaos. We all know that 2020, our lives changed. That's the day of chaos. But it doesn't happen spontaneously. It never happens spontaneously. And if anything you've gathered in me talking right now is you can't throw an election unless you know what you need, when you need it, and you have the resources to fill it. In other words, you can't just kick out a vote for President Trump and insert a Biden one in when there's not at least a synthetic voter behind it to back it up in case they ever have to look in the books. And so most people go, I don't understand how this could happen. I don't understand what went on. How could this even happen to us? Now, here's what you need to know. Is this election workers, your neighbor, Peggy, that's worked down at the elections for the last 30 years, nice blue-haired lady, do you think she's all of a sudden gun bad and hates Orange Man and wants to overthrow the country? No. All of this has been done right under our noses. And so the book, Countdown to Chaos, we take you through and we show you everything that got put in place prior to Donald J. Trump, that our system, our CIA, our government and our agencies put into place so they could once and for all understand everything about our elections, who's voting when, and simultaneously monitor 175,425 places, because that's what they have to monitor. Now, we don't have federal elections in the United States. We have basically 50, individual state elections, right? And so you have to, if you're going to take it over, you have to understand, okay, how can we move these pieces around and do it? So that was the basis of the Russia hoax. And President Trump told you this. In fact, he and I talked about it in December. We sat down for a very long time and talked about this and other subjects. It was never about Donald Trump and Russia, ever. What they did is they knew that America was changing. President Trump asked me this. He said, look, how did I win 2016 then? And I said, sir, you won 2016 because you inspired people and they got off their butt. That's it. The system expected America to be the same America. Apathetic, don't go vote, don't be political. But you inspired people. People who didn't want to vote or hadn't voted for a long time got off their butt and went and voted. I said, but an interesting thing happened. They felt that they had 2016 covered, but they didn't because too many people got off the couch. Well, in 2020, they were not going to let that happen again. So they needed the mega excuse, which I believe was COVID, the pandemic, because it kept you at home. It kept you distance. It affected poll workers and watchers doing their stuff, and it allowed them to get mail-in ballots. Well, what happened is all of that was created in the years leading up to the 2020 election, and the most nefarious acts were enacted by Barack Obama when he came in, where he put these things in place, which allowed all of our election systems to be seen and federalized. And what they did is they pulled the trigger by saying, Russia, 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 because in the name of saving you from nefarious bad Russia guys, we've got to make sure that the Russians aren't meddling. Well, how do they make sure they're meddling? Well, the government, CIA, they opened up all of these things called fusion centers. The fusion centers are a lot of international people, a lot of spooks, a lot of ghosts, etc., looking at it, and they're sitting there under the auspice. We're going to just make sure Russia's not doing anything bad. Well, what it did through police departments is gave them a backdoor into our elections. And that's why Maricopa, if you look at the election files, there were over 30,000 anonymous incursions into the database. We couldn't see that they did anything. We could just see that they popped up and were there. There were 30,000 of them. Well, ironically, when we're digging for it, you remember that little song came out, President Trump, Wendy's, where's routers and all that. We were trying to get the routers and Splunk logs, which they never turned over. Because if you get the router and Splunk logs, you know who was on the other end. Why couldn't we know who was on the other end? Because, again, first time in history, Maricopa moved its server, partnered with the sheriff. Okay, we're going to use your server. Why? Because the sheriff's server had this government backdoor in it that helps it snoop for security reasons. It connected them together, and they're coming in through the sheriff's office. And by the way, when we got to it in court and all of these rat duties were going to be, should have been sent to prison. The sheriff says, I'm not turning it over because it could jeopardize investigations and criminal files we have. And that's how they perfected themselves. So that book, Countdown to Chaos, which you just held up, basically starts backwards in time and shows you every step, every action, every executive order, every person, every signatory, every person who voted for it, and senators that put all of this in motion to where they could finally get to the point that they have federalized elections and they can make them go any way they want at any moment they want.
Wow.
And by the way, that book is not my words. That book is their documents, their words, their meetings, their Zooms, everything transcribed. You are looking at their discussions, them saying it, them doing it. Don't think this is just an opinion by me. That's those guys explaining what they did.
Yeah. Wow.
That's why I call it Countdown to Chaos, because that's what happened. That was the countdown that got us there to make this happen.
Yeah. Oh man. I hope the people watching this are just like loving this information, but also feeling that there's hope that things can be changed, that we
can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look, I know this is, I know it may sound like I'm being Debbie Downer, but let me give you an example. The human condition, the God part of our life, we don't learn until we get clobbered. We don't learn in good times. We don't learn when the money's rolling in. You learn when you get your butt kicked. You personally learn to reinvent your career when it went a different direction. Everybody's kind of done these things, right? You have to readjust. You have to recreate. It is the bad times and the tough times that make us better people. Would you rather be like back in Roman times when the Roman guards show up at your home or your whatever and take your wife, and your kids are going to the army, they're going to take your wife, and if you don't like it, they just cut off your head? No. They literally, you want to be able to see these things coming. Now, good thing about social media is we can now see it coming. We can see it happen. So what this is really a blessing. This is not a curse, because we've been oblivious. And I believe God has shown fit to open our eyes. I equate it to this. Back in olden times, God would talk to the prophets. Whatever your faith or religion is, doesn't matter. He talked to the prophets, prophets only, prophets disseminate it to the people. What I believe is going on, maybe for the first time in history, is God's communicating with every one of us. And it's because we have this thing called free will. We're either going to wake up to our free will and do something about it, or we're not. And so maybe we're being tested. Do we really deserve to have liberty and freedom? Do we need to be a people to be ruled and oppressed? Well, when you think about, okay, you don't get on a plane anymore with your shoes because somebody got on a bomb on a plane with a bomb in their shoe. That's why you take off your shoes. So we check for it. Well, would you rather be on the plane that did get on with a shoe bomb and it went off and took down the plane? Do you want to learn that way, or do you want to know in advance and go through the drill? So we've been given a peek. And more people now than ever know how our elections work, know what it's going through. And for the first time in ever, look, I used to think this, I could never believe there was, this evil cabal that for $1 billion going to take over the world kind of thing. I thought that was a joke. People can't work well enough together. Boy, was I wrong. There's been so much nefarious stuff for so long. We've been blind. We've been apathetic. But now we know. We know many things are broke. We know our medical system's compromised. We know a lot of our lawmakers are compromised. We know our intelligence services are compromised. And because of that, we can come out of it better. And there's the key. If you rely on your lawmakers, we're going to keep on getting this. They have no incentive to expose it because they're in office. They want to play along. They don't want to be booted out. And by the way, they want to get blackballed and railroaded, right? They don't want the gang up on them. So many of them are laying low because they're in. Let me just stay and see if I can squeak by. And so this is up to us, the people. And it's just like Donald Trump said, they're not after me, they're after you. See, the system is afraid of us. And I know it seems really bad right now, but you got to understand what we're up against. The evil system has been exposed. We can't put that genie back in the bottle. The evil system has been wounded. We know now how it works. We know they're stealing money. We know they're raping our system and everything else. Their back is against the wall. So yes, it's going to get nasty and it's going to get ugly and it's going to feel like our country's going away. But we still have the upper hand. Why? Because we know, and now we can do something about it. The only way we fail is if you just continue to buy into the old line they fed us all. Don't talk about religion and politics and everything will be fine. And that was part of the con too. You must activate. You must talk about this. You must have hard discussions. You must be polite about it. Look, it's divided families, but you must be discussing this, literally discussing this, everything that's going on, everything you're seeing across the map. And it's with those discussions we can find commonality and common ground. And by the way, most of those people who even have lost their way still want to live the American dream, still want to be free, still want to have the best economy in the world. And we certainly want to stay the country in the world that is prosperous, that 160 countries want to buy into. And by the way, for your young kids, and I say this when I speak to young kids, I say, let me tell you why we want to stay the type of nation we are today. I said, let me tell you a story. I said, let me tell you about how many of you would like to be like a social media super influencer? All these hands shoot up. I go, how would you like to be billionaire, multi-billionaire, Mark Zuckerberg? All these hands go up. I said, well, let me tell you the story of the Mark Zuckerberg of Venezuela. Have you ever heard about the Mark Zuckerbergs of Venezuela? No hands will go up. And I'll say, because there is no Mark Zuckerberg in Venezuela. Because when you become those type of countries, everything's owned by the government. Your opportunity's gone too. So even the dreams you harbor, even though you're being told the system's bad, it's all misguiding you. Learn from around you. We've been here before, and history is the greatest teacher.
Yeah, yeah. I believe we're going to get through this. Jovan, this was a great discussion. I'm going to put a direct link to your book down below.
Thank you.
Where can I push people to follow you online? What would
I broadcast? I do a program similar to yours, meaning you can hear me on either talk radio or you can watch me. And I have people remember it this way. It's just my name at Rumble. So it's rumble.com/Jovan Hutton Pulitzer. It's very easy to remember. And I broadcast 7 a.m., 7 p.m., 7 days a week. I do that in Central Standard Time, even though I'm not in Central Standard Time, to remember it, 777, because we're all lucky we can gather this way. So if you can remember 777, 7 a.m., 7 p.m., 7 days a week, Central Standard Time, you can find me on Rumble. The name of my program is called Cut the Crap, because that's just what you want to do. And grab the politicians, you want to shake them by the little pelts and say, cut the crap. And for me, crap, which everybody feels we're going through crap, is just an acronym, CRAP, which stands for culture, race, and American politics. Because when you mix all those together, it literally sends our world into hell in a handbasket very quick.
Well, I'm going to put a direct link down below so that they can find it easily. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for staying in this fight. I know you could just go off and make medical patented technology and be happy, but you are in the fight. You are a man in the arena, and I respect that and I appreciate that. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.